Stop motion movies are for children, or at least it feels that way. Many popular stop motion films always seem to cater towards a younger audience, which is ironic to say the least because Coraline caused more childhood trauma than most mature movies ever could. Regardless, I asked myself what a stop motion movie would look like if it was made for grown-ups, and the answer to that question is quite literally a horrific nightmare, gruesomely wrapped up in the form of Mad God, a movie created by visual effects legend Phil Tippett. If you recognize that name, then you're a true fan of Star Wars, Robocop, Jurassic Park, but most importantly, Starship Troopers. I'm doing my part. Jokes aside, Phil Tippett was behind some of history's most iconic stop-motion special effects. He animated the walkers or AT-ATs in Star Wars, he helped create the arachnids in Starship Troopers, and he was the famous dinosaur supervisor for Jurassic Park, the latter resulting in the horrible tragedy that happened on Isla Nublar. But at least Phil did make a YouTube video responding to the outrage where he said, in all caps, "You weren't there!" And I mean, yeah, fair. You think it's easy supervising a park filled with prehistoric beasts? I mean, look at the most recent Jurassic World fiasco. They're doing an even worse job. I mean, why is there a T-Rex in my backyard? Huh? Anyways, Phil Tippett is clearly no stranger to stop motion, as his very own mentor was Ray Harryhausen himself. Harryhausen's visual effects in movies such as The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad literally inspired the minds of some of the most famous filmmakers to date, such as George Lucas, Peter Jackson, and Steven Spielberg. So you know Phil learned from a master craftsman. And after such a vibrant life filled with some of the best dad lore a guy could ask for, Phil Tippett found himself at the mercy of Mad God, a movie that I can't even begin to describe. If I did, I'd say it's like tripping on acid, talking to your pet cat named Brian as you crawl through a cupboard to the center of the world where you float through a sea of molecules. That actually happened, by the way. I'm just quoting Phil when he said he took LSD and proceeded to work on Return of the Jedi. Oh man, the 80s. The conception of Mad God came about during the late 1980s, while Phil Tippett was experimenting with various creative stop-motion projects. He had created about 6 minutes in total over the course of the next few years, but decided to shelve the project while working on Jurassic Park in 1993. And for those of you wondering what dinosaur supervisor actually meant, Phil Tippett oversaw the CGI when it came to animating the dinosaurs. You see, Steven Spielberg originally wanted more traditional practical effects when it came to bringing the prehistoric creatures to life, but after seeing how advanced computer graphics became, Spielberg changed his mind. This very decision was said to be the nail in the coffin for stop motion by Phil Tippett himself. Ironically, the CGI in Jurassic Park would end up being a combination of both computer graphics and stop motion. Phil and his team would come in and animate this little T-Rex miniature that was hooked up to a computer that tracked its movements frame by frame. That's one of the main reasons why the dinosaurs looked so crisp in the movie. And after Jurassic Park hit theaters, the world of visual effects started to drastically change as the new digital era became more prevalent. And I mean, imagine being in Phil Tippett's shoes as this practical career you've built through decades of hard work is rendered obsolete by some computer guys. Pun not intended. So Phil Tippett did what humans do best and adapted. He created Tippett Studios, which was a visual effects company that specialized in both digital and practical effects. This studio would end up working on some absolute classics such as The Ring, Hellboy, Constantine, Shark Boy, and Lava Girl, most of the Twilight movies. Okay, to be fair, I haven't actually watched any of the Twilight films, so I'll get back to you on that one. But suffice to say, Tippett Studios has an amazing filmography filled with some really horrifying creature designs. And if it wasn't for this studio, Phil Tippett most likely would never have finished Mad God, because back in the early 2010s, while Phil was archiving many of his old practical effects, some people at the studio took interest in a specific project. And after 20 years of gathering dust, Mad God would be revived. Suddenly, Phil had a whole crew of people who grew up in the digital era itching to create with their hands. The problem was, stop motion wasn't cheap, nor was it quick to make. But after a very successful Kickstarter campaign and another 10 years of working on weekends and holidays, Phil Tippett's stop motion passion project was done. Mad God would finally hit theaters in June of 2022, and after 33 years, we would bear witness to the most bewitchingly horrific stop-motion movie I've personally ever seen. But before we dive into the movie, I do just want to say, trying to understand Mad God feels like a means to an end, and you'll see why in a minute. I will try my best to describe this fever dream of a film, and then we can try and interpret what it might mean, but first, let me give you a little bit of insight which will hopefully make the film more digestible and thus enjoyable, because I mean, if we're already going to be confused, we might as well be having fun while being confused. Yeah, so as I understand it, creation is an experience, and that experience is Mad God. I'm not going to stand here and say that I understand Mad God. The only person who can claim to understand this movie is Phil Tippett himself, but even he says he doesn't quite get Mad God sometimes. He sees himself as a conduit or a vessel in which Mad God came to be. He was just assembling the pieces of a collage that was already there. Phil Tippett describes the creation of Mad God in a similar sense to how one dreams. You don't intentionally decide to dream, your body just does it subconsciously, and then when you wake up, you might remember this weird sequence of memories, actions, or events that felt out of place but also cohesive. And Phil Tippett did take a lot of inspiration from his own dreams in this regard. Keeping that in mind, we can better understand Phil Tippett, and thus by association, Mad God, when he says he was more so a vessel through which the film could be created, rather than intentionally deciding to create it. Now that did confuse me slightly, but a metaphor I used to help me better understand this was, instead of trying to force yourself to fart and nothing happens, a fart will just arrive naturally and you can choose to let it rip, preferably just before leaving a crowded elevator. I'm sorry, that was such a bad metaphor. So now that we have a better understanding of the man behind Mad God, as well as how the film functions, we can finally start at the beginning. And I'm talking before Christ's beginning. The film opens with a passage from Leviticus 26 that reads, let me just get into character.
If you disobey me and remain hostile to me, I will act against you in wrathful hostility. I, for my part, will discipline you sevenfold for your sins. And you I will scatter among the nations, and I will unsheath the sword against you. Your land shall become a desolation, and your cities a ruin.
So, that was a little intense, but it surprisingly summarizes the film rather well. We are immediately greeted with this seemingly absolute rule. If you disobey God or act in hostility, you and your entire world will be punished. And if you didn't notice from the title of the movie, someone or something was feeling rather defiant. I will say there is some religious symbolism in the film. Not only are there references to Christianity, but also Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, and so on. The idea of there being a creator plays an important role, not only in the narrative, but also in how the film was made. It's all practical, so everything you see was created by someone, which will be important later. Now, Mad God doesn't follow your classic hero's journey narrative. Instead, we're unfortunate to witness the horrors of this film unfold in a rather messy way. There are no words spoken throughout the movie, besides a brief scene where two gnomes are insulting each other in French, but you don't have to worry about that, they very quickly get stepped on by the protagonist. So, without any dialogue, it does make figuring out context a hell of a lot more difficult, but also all the more interesting as everything we see we start to question. I mean, what is this? What am I looking at? Seriously, what is this? Huh? And since no one speaks, you don't learn the names of any of the characters until after the movie's done. And that, folks, is why end credits are so important. So after God drops some bars in Leviticus, we cut to a small metal pod being lowered from the sky as it's being shot at by cannons. Inside the pod is a figure wearing a gas mask, and we learn that they are called the Assassin. And as the pod descends, we pass through layer after layer of what seems to be ancient civilizations that have been buried and forgotten. And immediately, the lack of dialogue is made up for by the visual aesthetics and the sound design. That whole intro about Phil Tippett wasn't just to hype him up, him and his crew did a fantastic job creating these miniature sets and practical effects, while the soundtrack brings it all to life. I mean, there isn't a moment throughout the film where we feel bored, as we are constantly bombarded by really strange visuals. This is both a good and a bad thing, as we are forced to bear witness to some truly disgusting imagery, which makes makes us beg the question, why is this world like this? Anyways, the small metal pod finally reaches its destination, which is this mountain range of orange egg-shaped slopes. We see the pod land on the street of a long-destroyed city as the assassin climbs out, grabs their suitcase, and starts following an old paper map that they have in their jacket pocket. We then follow this character as they make their way through this ruined land, and all that surrounds us is a world of desolation. Everything seems to be old and rusty. Pools of green acid illuminate the smoky sky as various fires crackle in the distance. But even amongst all the dirt and grime, life still seems to exist. Well, I'm hesitant to call this thing life. To be honest, I'm not even sure what it is, but whatever it is, our main character makes sure to avoid it when it pitches up to kill this creature hiding in a barrel after it just caught this rat-like abomination on a fishing wire. The assassin then manages to sneak past as the violence unfolds, seemingly unaffected or unbothered by the cruelty of this world. The idea that our main character is on some sort of mission as they follow their map is further backed up by the next scene where they descend further into a broken building. Here we see the assassin open a door to a room filled with a bunch of various creatures. As the assassin looks around, an ape-like creature strapped to a table reaches out for help only to have the door shut as the assassin leaves to continue their journey. Also, a funny side note, I did crack up a little when they panned over to what is clearly just two people in cages wearing gorilla costumes as they hop up and down. There are elements of live action mixed into the film, as we'll see later, but amidst all the horror, it's nice to be reminded that Phil and everyone else working on the film were genuinely having fun with it. Regardless, the assassin continues to descend past things that are going to be really difficult for me to describe, but I'll try my best. We pass a row of giant humanoid figures sitting on chairs as they get electrocuted by the helmets on their heads. As they are getting shocked, we see large amounts of bodily fluids exit from beneath their chairs. It's just poop. I try to be polite. The poop is then funneled into the mouth of a fleshy machine that then filters it through hundreds of these lungs with eyeballs on them. The green liquid from that is then used to power this piston machine that then produces these little poop men. Fun fact, these featureless humanoid figures were created using whatever was inside Phil Tippett's vacuum cleaner at the time. The assassin then watches as hundreds of these poop men shuffle towards this huge metal factory in the distance. I first assumed that they would simply be mindless workers that keep the factory functioning, and while that may be true, I think it's more accurate to say that they are quite literally the fuel that keeps the machine running. We see thousands of poop men working, cleaning, getting squashed, dying, being recycled as they all inevitably become a part of the factory. And what's being created are these rough metal-like slabs that can float and fly through the sky with the help of this magnetic frequency device. This device is controlled by an amalgamation of screens that display bloodshot eyes and mouths, and at one point all the poop men gather to listen to the orders from this disembodied mouth, but all we hear are the mumbling sounds of a newborn baby. While all of that is happening, the assassin watches in silence. They then look at the last few pieces of their map as they open up a hatch in the floor to descend once more. Just before that happens though, one of the poop men notices the assassin and looks at them curiously. They have this brief moment of silent pondering before one of these two-legged hippo-like atrocities comes to squash the poop man. The poop man then reaches out as if crying for help, only to be ignored as the assassin watches him get reduced to another stain on the ground. Cut to black. Now I know that was a lot, but just bear with me a little longer. I told you it was gonna be strange. Did you think fever dream was just a fun expression I wanted to use? No! That's quite literally the entire movie. Anyways, we cut to the assassin switching on a torch as they make their way down a flight of stairs, stepping on a worm as they do so. We also notice that unbeknownst to the assassin, something has been following them all this time. As we walk through a dark labyrinth covered in oil and grime, we start to feel like this may finally be the lowest layer of this world. The wind whistles softly in the distance. No other life seems to exist here as the assassin steps over what suspiciously looks like other gas masks. We enter a clearing as we see thousands of suitcases piled on top of each other, but not a soul in sight. The assassin comes to a standstill as they crouch down and open their suitcase, and inside we see a bomb with a timer. The assassin starts the countdown as they watch to make sure it goes off, not noticing the creature that attacks them from the darkness. The assassin tries to escape, only to be dragged dived off into the distance, leaving the bomb behind. And now we are left watching the torch slowly fade as another suitcase fails to achieve its purpose. That purpose being to destroy this world. Now I will say, the world building and creature designs are so cool, truly disgusting, but so cool. For example, the thing that attacks the assassin is genuinely terrifying. I mean, imagine if a spider, a scorpion, and a human melded together into a bionicle Lego toy that then crawled out of your stomach like the chest buster in Alien. That's what it looks like. Hell, that might actually be what it's made of. Anyways, the plot up until this point seems to be relatively straightforward. An assassin is sent by someone or something to destroy this world. They have a map to guide them and a suitcase carrying a bomb. But as they fail their mission, we find out that this wasn't their first attempt, as we see thousands of suitcases left behind by previous people. This raises some questions like who or what is sending these assassins? Why are they trying to destroy this world? Also, where exactly is this world? Because we see this pod descend through multiple ruined civilizations, some of which alien but others seem to be very human, and if that's the case, then what's on the surface of this world? Or are there multiple worlds that we are traveling through? I know, a lot of questions, and hopefully we'll find some answers in the next part of the movie. Now remember when I said that we will witness the horrors of this film unfold in a rather messy way? Well, Mad God is technically divided up into 4 parts that are glued together to create the full movie. The reason for this being is because Phil Tippett wanted a way to revisit an idea and possibly add to it if need be. So similar to how a dream jumps from one scene to the next, Phil created a wormhole narrative, as he puts it, that allowed him to have multiple stories take place simultaneously while still relating to one another. But due to how a movie works, we watch it play out in a linear fashion. And what all of that mumbo jumbo essentially means is that the movie is just going to get more confusing as we go along. But I mean, that's why you're here, right? You're too lazy to figure out Mad God, so leave it up to some random dude with a Lord of the Rings poster to do it for you. Because apparently, I seem like a valid source of information. I mean, what if I told you I'm making it all up as I go along? What then, huh? Would you do your own research? What about thinking for yourself for once? I dare you. I just end the video here. I'm kidding. I watch video essays for the exact same reason. Anyways, back to the movie. The next part of the film opens with a group of people sitting down at what looks like a theater. The curtain opens to reveal the silhouette of the assassin chained to a table as they struggle to free themselves. They are then sedated as 2 shrouded figures rip off the assassin's clothes while the audience laughs in amusement, and then after a brief applause, the curtains close. We then cut to multiple operating rooms, most of which containing a bandaged body of what we assume to be all the captured assassins. Fair warning, things do get a little gruesome in the next scene, but I'll try keep things light for those of you eating instant noodles right now. We pan to the only body that doesn't seem to be in a grisly state. The assassin is hooked up to multiple tubes and a mouth brace that seems to aid them in their breathing. They look around with bloodshot eyes as they rest their gaze on a clock mounted to the wall. We see time start to slow as if this moment was taking an eternity, only for it to resume when the doctor and the nurse arrive. They are both played by real people, but their movements are sped up to imitate this stop motion effect, giving them this almost inhuman feeling. The doctor proceeds to operate on the assassin as he cuts open his chest and starts violently digging around. We see him remove what would normally reside in the torso, followed by golden coins, jewelry, pearl necklaces, papers, books, dead bony worm creatures, and then finally, this thing. Yeah, it then starts to cry out like a newborn baby as it's wrapped up in this cute pink blanket. The nurse then carries it away as the doctor drills a hole into the assassin's head and then uses a machine to presumably view their memories. The doctor stares into a static screen as we fade into the next part of the film. So now we at least know what happens to all these assassins, as they are not immediately killed but are instead captured and operated on. Turns out that bionicle chest buster was actually a guard dog, although I'm unfamiliar with the breed. It's giving Chihuahua energy. Regardless, these people seem to want 2 things from our descending hitmen. 1, please don't blow up our world, however messed up it may be. And 2, they seem to want the gift of life and knowledge. Again, hesitant to call this thing life, because I mean, but it's going to play an important role later on, so burn that image into your head. And speaking of heads, let's see what's inside the skull of our now dead protagonist. We cut to an old white dude who's never heard of a nail clipper before as he looks down at a bunch of people yodeling in a snowstorm. Okay, that might have been a bit harsh. It's a post-apocalyptic world. Nail clippers are probably really difficult to come by. Jokes aside, we are introduced to another ruinous setting. The land seems desolate as corpses are seen moving about, destroying their environment. A man gazes through his binoculars as he watches all these figures start yelling in the wind. He turns and makes his way through a crumbling building where he finds a clothing rack and gets changed. Once dripped up, he walks over to a table where an incense stand is burning, and underneath said table, we see what looks like 3 old hags. The end credits do call them witches, but if you're an avid Skyrim enthusiast, you'd know otherwise. Anyways, the 3 witches proceed to sew a leather map together, which they then give to the old man, and after a quick look and a bit of grunting, he seems satisfied. Hold up! He then takes the map to this huge warehouse where we see hundreds of assassins standing in silence. The man walks up to a podium where we see the pod from the first act, and he hands over the map to a new figure waiting to descend. The man pulls the correct lever to Yzma Kronk's delight as we see the pod slowly descend once more. The man makes his way to a room filled with a bunch of communication devices as he watches the pod being lowered. We then cut to a new setting littered with ruined skyscrapers, walking corpses, and for lack of a better term, red glowing aliens? As our assassin gathers their bearings, glances at their map, and begins their journey, the pod returns to the heavens once more. We also get an interesting moment here where our new protagonist spots the silhouette of another assassin in the window of a building, but paying them no mind, our new guy grabs a dirt bike that miraculously still works and drives out of the city, leaving the ruins behind. The dirt bike very quickly breaks and the assassin swaps to an old broken car. Following the map, we then drive through a wasteland decorated by the remnants of war. Huge craters mark the land while piles of carcasses form mountains around us. The assassin continues unbothered by the skulls on spikes, seemingly warning us of the dangers ahead. What follows is what I assume to be the continuation of the war we just drove through, only now we see it in all its devastating glory. Various combat machines are seen firing at one another while bullets ring through the air. The assassin manages to drive through the desolation relatively unscathed as they make their way further into hell. There were some really interesting tank designs in the scene, and combined with the miniature explosions made for a really cool visual representation of stop motion war, which I haven't seen done before, so that was nice. Moving along, the assassin drives past piles of familiar looking suitcases as they look at their map and points to their final destination. They then drive into this large square labyrinth and disappear into a hole, only for the camera to pan out of the TV static and back to the doctor, returning us to the first act. Now, I did originally call this part of the film a memory of our initial assassin since we are looking directly into their head, but that's just an assumption. It's already been established through the mountain of treasure that came out of their stomach that a head could possibly contain more than just memories. I mean, maybe this is how these people locate and stop new descending assassins, who knows? But what we do know is that all these hitmen have been sent by the Last Man, which was what the end credits were kind enough to call the guy with the long fingernails. And what an interesting name that is, because if he is indeed the Last Man, then what are all the things that I assumed were people? Also, what happened to the rest of humanity, and why is the Last Man so fixated on blowing everything up? Well, I'd be lying to you if I said the next and last part of the film answers all those questions, so brace yourself. If you thought things were already weird, then I'm going to have to ask you to raise your expectations so you can pass the height limit for the roller coaster of events that's about to transpire. This will make no sense, but at least it looks cool. Alex Archives, 2025. After cutting back to the doctor and nurse, we see the nurse hurriedly carry the newborn worm creature to a large metal door. Electricity hums and gears start to turn as the door opens, and we see a towering figure dressed in all black emerge from the darkness. Wearing a plague mask, this figure reaches out with their long bony fingers and takes the worm creature into their arms. They give it a good jiggle and then leave as the large metal door slams shut. The nurse then walks over to a patch of hay and lays down, closing her eyes after a frankly exhausting day, followed by a moment that genuinely scared the poop men out of me. For some reason, the combination of the nurse opening her eyes impossibly wide and the sound of the newborn baby crying in the distance really disturbed me, caught me so off guard. I doubt it was an intentional jump scare, but that was the only part in the film that visibly shook me. Regardless, the dark figure proceeds to carry the newborn through a labyrinth of stone slabs, a grand hall filled with giant statues, the glitter realm apparently, and a castle guarded by two massive bulls with red glowing eyes that feels like something out of the never-ending story. As this figure floats along their journey, another baby-like monster crawls out of who knows where and starts calling out mama to the dark ethereal plague doctor. And I mean, if there was going to be one thing that we knew would survive the apocalypse, it'd be goth girls. Regardless, we then cut to these massive burning furnaces as we pan down into the grimy depths of this land. We are then introduced to a hunchback creature making their way through a hallway filled with various skeletons as we cut to a violent battle between these two ape-like beasts. The hunchback, who we will come to know as the alchemist, sounds an alarm to stop the fight and then uses some rather intense torture methods to get these beasts back to work. That work being shoveling more poop. What did you expect? Of course it's more fecal matter. Get your mind out of the gutter and back into the toilet. Unfortunately, the ape-like creatures very quickly resumed their gruesome battle as we cut back to the alchemist doing, you'll never guess what, alchemy? No! It seems like the art of keeping a vivarium is still alive and well, even post-apocalypse. But seriously, the tonal shift between the dark, ruinous world that we've seen up until this point, contrasted against the colorful, upbeat environment of the vivarium, was not expected. We then see the alchemist release these spider-like creatures to prey on the inhabitants of the small enclosure, which I believe symbolizes one of the themes the film's trying to convey rather well. But for now, we need to address something much more important. As we see the colorful spider-like crab monster snatch its prey and run away, we pass what can only be described as two fleas sitting at a table, drinking tea and playing cards, seemingly unbothered by the horrors that they just witnessed. Why is that important? I don't know. Does it play an integral part to the narrative? I don't think so. So why am I bringing it up? Because it's there and I needed you to see it. Sorry, small side tangents. I think this one scene perfectly captures the thought process behind the people working on Mad God, specifically because it's there. Why? Because it can be. The idea that a bunch of people sat in a workshop, thought about what they could possibly create for this quick throwaway scene, and this is what they came up with, as well as pulled off to such an intricate and practical level, can only be described with one word: passion. Passion to create, to try and make something that can only be found in your dreams. Maybe I'm overthinking this, and that could very well be the case, but if there's one thing I've learned throughout researching for this video, it's the fact that stop motion is extremely tedious to make. Phil Tippett has said on multiple occasions that you would have to be a little mad to want to do this, meaning that any idea proposed for the movie would have to have a lot of thought and preparation put into it before filming could even begin. Thus, it's so cool to see that someone in that workshop had an idea as outlandish as T's sitting at a table playing cards and drinking tea, and everyone else hopped on board to bring that idea to life. That's the end of my tangent. I just thought that was very cool. We can now get back to the alchemist as they take joy in playing God. After messing around with the vivarium, we get a better look at the laboratory as the alchemist starts doing some spring cleaning. We see metal heads with human eyes watching the hunchback's every move. We see plenty of old grandfather clocks chiming away in the background, with multiple jars and beakers filled with various liquids in the foreground. After a brief sweep, the alchemist looks through a telescope and we get momentary flashes of what seems to be humanity. These moments quickly turn into nuclear explosions as the hunchback stares in awe, as if fascinated by the destruction we created. Quickly cut to a baby crying as we turn to see the ethereal plague doctor float down some stairs holding the bony worm creature like it's an old dirty rag. Both the alchemist and the plague doctor then team up like Dexter and Dee Dee as they cook up creation itself in their laboratory. That's not an over-exaggeration. They quite literally grind up the bony worm creature and smelt it down into this golden glitter that's then chucked into this massive furnace as it turns into a universe. Yeah, that's a crazy sentence. The movie then cuts to a short montage of a galaxy being born. We see civilizations being erected only for some anarchists to pitch up with a suspiciously familiar looking suitcase as they blow everything to smithereens. It's all then buried under rubble as we cut to a black hole with these massive metal slabs from the first act floating out of it, and then we cut to black. It was at this point that I thought, wait, that's the end of the movie? You can't be serious. And I was indeed proven wrong, because why have one montage when you can have two? Cut to another montage of time starting to speed up as we see every clock in the movie start spinning wildly. The sound of ticking gets louder as the clocks not only move forward in time but also backwards as we see every world we were introduced to freeze over, melt, return to normal, repeat, and then finally we rest on the very first suitcase we saw. The one that seemed to malfunction as the assassin was taken away by that bionicle chest-buster chihuahua. We see the timer reach its last tick, only for us to cut to a red cuckoo bird that looks at us as if we're the mad ones, only for the screen to cut to black as we wake up from this horrific nightmare. Roll the end credits. What a wild ride. What did we just watch? What does it all mean? Why are we still here? Just to suffer. While looking past the surprisingly accurate Metal Gear quote, Mad God was indeed a questionable experience. First and foremost, I'd like to say I did enjoy watching the film. The stop motion and practical effects for me were the best part. Stop motion movies are far and few between nowadays, so it's so cool to see one that revolves around much darker themes and subject matter. With that being said, I'll admit, I'm not perfect. There were some things that I didn't understand, and that's okay. Phil Tippett did say that Mad God wasn't made to be understood, it was made to be experienced. So go and watch the movie and experience it, so that we can now defy the creator and try to understand it. Wait, isn't that a paradox? Because in trying to understand the film, we are going against its creator's will, thus we are defying them, meaning that we are the inhabitants of Mad God in a never-ending cycle as we fail to understand because we want to understand, and thus we understand. You know what? Never mind. Phil Tippett was right. Creation is an experience, and that experience is Mad God. I'm not going to stand here and say that I understand Mad God, but I do believe we can learn something from it. Throughout the movie, the question I kept pondering was, why is this world like this? And an answer to that question could be because this world's creator made it so, both in the film's narrative and in the medium the film was made. We are never shown how exactly this world came to be this way, or rather how exactly God was defied, but we can certainly see what that aftermath looks like. And it is truly disturbing. Many post-apocalyptic movies normally have two ideas for why the world has fallen into ruin. One is the rise of a second party, like artificial intelligence for example, that seeks to wipe out humans for some reason or another. And let's please try keep that fun movie concept fictional, I beg of you. And two, there's an idea I've seen becoming a lot more popular nowadays, that being humanity wiping themselves out. You know, Pandora's box and all that jazz. Mad God for me feels like a world where humans brought about their own demise, except dying would be a gift because humanity wouldn't have to live in the world that they destroyed. Thus, they are forced to live in a cycle of rebirth, never being able to escape their own decimation. The last man continues his attempts at destroying the world, but is forever waiting because the monsters that were once human use his assassins in their own attempt at salvation. They take the bony worm creature, a mutated form of new life, and offer it up as a sacrifice for the creation of a new universe, bringing about the destruction of the old one. But creation isn't always kind, and this world's creator has already spoken their will. Time speeds up, only to be reversed, forcing all that's been created to repeat the fate they brought upon themselves. Humanity defied creation, and were thus punished to live in destruction. I know, a little dark, but I do think there is a good reason for that. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a lot of tension in the air around practical effects due to the rise of computer graphics, and one of the people at the forefront of that tension was Phil Tippett. He has spoken about the anxiety that came from witnessing the medium through which you create slowly die, and I can't even begin to imagine how devastating that must have been. And I'm not saying that Mad God is a flat-out representation of that anxiety, but I do think it played a role in shaping the reason for why Mad God wanted to be made, which leads me to my final point, the thing that we can learn from all this madness. Back in the early 2010s, 2010s, a studio full of digital artists asked a man if they could learn how to create with their hands, and that man said yes. Whether it was out of compassion for the people who never got to experience the art they grew up with, or whether it was out of nostalgia for a medium the man had been forced to forget, we will never know. Regardless, everyone in that studio wanted to create for the sake of creating, and thus turned creation itself into an experience for us to witness. And that experience is Mad God, a love letter to creation, one that reminds us that anything is possible, even our dreams. And I think I'll end this rather zealous? Am I using that word correctly? Zealous? I'll end this rather zealous monologue with a quote from the man who inspired us all. Fantasy is the very basis of my career, and movies allowed me to make reality of my dreams, breathing life into all the ideas that existed in my mind. So, if there's any takeaway from watching Mad God, it's that the epic battles I had with my Bionicles as a kid could have turned into a career path if I just stuck with it, so I'm going to be regretting that for the rest of my life. But also, and probably more importantly, go out and make things. Seriously. That's it. Sorry if that wasn't the philosophical proverb that most video essays round off with. That's what I tried to do like 2 paragraphs ago. I hope you feel inspired in some regard. Regardless, there's also a few things I want to say just before this video drifts off into your algorithm once more. 1, my opening line where I say stop motion movies are for children was a joke. I personally love stop motion movies, and I'm an adult. Hopefully I'm not alone when I say that. 2, if you can, please do go and watch Mad God. It was such an interesting watch, and I would love to hear what your interpretation of it was in the comments. Most of what I said towards the end was how I came to interpret the film, but there is so much in this movie that someone else could walk away with a completely different perspective. 3, go and work on that creative project you've been putting off for way too long because you keep getting inside your own head. Here's some advice that Phil Tippett gave his crew while they were working on Mad God. Don't think. Period. And 4, well, that's actually about it. If you enjoyed this video, thank you. Subscribe if you want to. Ouch. No, I'm kidding. Anyways, if you do have any recommendations for some weird movies, I'll be in the comment section congratulating the person that typed first with 2 T's. Congratulations. And if you want to support me more directly, I'll link my Patreon down below where you can watch some of my BTS content, the movie term, not the K-pop group, that obviously. And there's also film reactions there, and you'll get your name added to the end credits at the end of the video. Thank you again so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you again very, very soon. Bye-bye now. Cause it's a never-ending story. Na, 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 na. Also, on a completely ironic side note, I wrote that joke forgetting that I actually have the never-ending story here. So, fantastic movie. Highly recommend checking it out. It is great. It will traumatize you, but it's so good. Practical effects, peak. It's great. It's really good.